Hello and welcome to DIY Therapy. As always, we'll start with a disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not designed to diagnose or treat. When beginning any exercise program, it should be reviewed and discussed with your medical professional prior to beginning. Information on this podcast is not designed to replace medical treatment. My name is Will. With me as always is Andrew.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Not too much. How about yourself?
What's a good word?
Bird is the word.
Bird is a word.
As far as I know, I guess. The good word is it's Thursday.
Yeah. One more day till the weekend, right? Where you've got a lot of honey-do list things to do and things to check off your list over the weekend, don't you?
Yep. As do you, I imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Got to be a busy one. So, what are we talking about today?
Well, I think we'll talk about, at least where we are, it's starting to be more cold, which means more ice, which means the likelihood of ankle problems.
You think there's a correlation between ice and ankle problems?
I think there's a correlation between ice and slipping and then twisting your ankle.
I'd like to see some research on that one.
I don't have it.
Okay, perfect. So we're looking at ankles this week, though, right?
Yeah, just generally.
Typically, when we talk about ankle sprains, right, your ankle is usually going to turn inward on you.
Why is that? Yes, that is correct. I know the answer why it is. Why is it always in?
Well, it's in because there's more movement with the joint play for the joint to actually turn inward, and there's less movement when the ankle is going to turn outward, so that it gets blocked by the bone from moving in that outward position.
Yeah, if you were to look down at your ankle and feel them, your ankle on the outside is lower, and the ankle on the inside is a little higher. So he has a more play. There's less bony things to get in the way. That's why you don't roll it. You almost never roll it out.
Yeah, if you roll it out, you're actually more prone to like a dislocation of an ankle, which actually we just saw in the clinic not too long ago.
Yeah.
And did he ever show you the picture of that? It was pretty gnarly.
No, I'm glad.
Is he still on?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah. So usually if you do like if you're actually rolling it inward, you'll actually get like a dislocation, which is a much bigger issue. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about more about what we would consider an inversion ankle sprain. So this is when the ankle will actually roll in. Typically it happens, and it could happen in like a athletic type of event if you come down on someone's foot, or if you are walking on like an uneven surface and that foot will kind of roll out to the side and you'll kind of roll down onto it and it'll sprain some very big and key ligaments on the outside of the joint there. Typically what will happen is you'll have some swelling that will ensue. It could swell up like the size of a golf ball. It could be minor swelling. There could be some bruising that's involved. And the first kind of thing that you want to do from a care standpoint is what? Ice and elevate, right?
Yep. It's the old rest, ice, and elevate.
Mm-hmm. So you'll get you'll get a lot of pooling of the blood down there. You may even have some actual bruising and things like that. That's okay. It doesn't mean that anything's fractured. Obviously, if you elevate for 3, 4, 5, 6 days, your icing and the swelling and the pain isn't going down dramatically, you may want to go in and get it actually checked out. If you roll it real bad and it bruises up and swells, you may want to get an x-ray right away, just rule out any type of fractures, but most likely it's not. So the first step is, really activity modification, get away from weight bearing, get away from loading that joint through normal walking. You might want to even put yourself on crutches for a bit, and then slowly start to introduce weight bearing once the pain levels start to kind of drop down. So how do you typically like to introduce weight bearing with an ankle sprain? Well,
I like to do it in a controlled environment where they have access to something. I usually put them in the parallel bars so they can at least, if they need to, they can hold on to something and get the weight off if something happens. But if at home, standing at the kitchen counter or something to that effect, where they can do the same thing, and it's just basically weight shifting, so almost like you're a junior high slow dance, where you're just kind of side to side, or you can go forwards and backwards kind of thing, just kind of slowly introduce it and just slowly...
I love that. The junior high weight shifting. That's perfect. That's a great analogy.
You've never heard that before? I use that all the time.
No, I haven't. Yeah. Where the arms are fully extended out and you're barely touching them and you're just shifting back and forth.
You better be able to put a balloon between you and that person you're dancing with.
I'm pretty sure we got in trouble. I went to a Catholic grade school and there was no bodies getting close at a 7th grade dance. I can tell you that right there.
Shocking.
Yeah, right. So, typically there's so I agree with you in terms of the weight bearing, weight shifting. First, you're just trying to load the joint in general, and then so you can do this like at the kitchen sink, and then also, so that's kind of a more lateral movement, side to side movement. Then you'd start to introduce a little bit more of kind of that weight shifting forward and backwards. So kind of just like a simple heel toe rocking. Is something that I would start with then. And you can load. I think what's important here too is that your goal here is obviously, again, not to do anything that's creating more pain. So a couple tips. One is, you might have a little bit of pain while you're doing a little bit of discomfort. That's okay if it goes away 5-10 minutes afterwards. If you're hurting worse in the ankle, at 30, 40, 60 minutes afterwards, even after icing, and the pain is still elevated, you probably did too much. So that's a good kind of way to just kind of continue to assess how much you're doing and whether or not you're doing too much and whether or not you're going to set the ankle back anymore and have any regressions. But the way that I always have people try to do this when they're weight bearing, whether it's side to side or forward onto their toes, is to continue to weight bear through your arms. So if you're doing this like at the kitchen sink in your home, you can put weight, whatever you can tolerate, through the leg, and then the other weight you're going to put through your arm. So, if you can only tolerate, say, 50% of weight on that foot, go ahead and bear weight through the shoulders and the arms to kind of take some of that weight off of there so that you can start to go through the normal movements and start to load it to what your joint will tolerate. So, I think that's important. It's not just one of these things where, okay, the next phase is to start loading it, so you just shift back and forth and put all kinds of weight on it. You still need to be cognizant and aware of what you're doing to the joint and whether or not you're creating any pain. And then, of course, once you finally start to, a nice transition to strengthening the ankle or some functional movement patterns is, once you start to get, to where you're not putting any weight through those arms with that heel-toe rocking, what you can actually do is take your hands away, and then it turns into almost a balance activity also as you're rocking and shifting back and forth from the heels to the toes. And you can do this where you're just putting a finger on the countertop to where you have a little bit of balance and a little bit of support, or to where you're taking your hands completely away. But that'll help to start to train some of the proprioception, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that's usually how I start to transition people a little bit to more of the balance and weight bearing there.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think compression is probably something that people probably need to think about if they are keeping the joint, lower. Like some of us may, we might be weekend warriors. We sprain our ankle playing pickup game of basketball, but we're accountants, and so we sit at a computer, for the rest of the week after it's been swollen, and so that leg is going to just continue to have swelling and edema collect down there. Sometimes by getting like a compression sock. What are you laughing at?
Swelling and edema again.
Oh yeah. A compression sock. I think you need. You don't know what the milligrams per mercury compression you need.
No, that always like falls under, like, to me that always falls under like lymphedema kind of things. They would know that sort of stuff better than I.
Yeah, I think if you go to a Walgreens or CVS, you can actually get some compression socks that I think are between like 16 and 19 basically mercury pressure, et cetera, et cetera. I can't remember what the actual terminology is. But that usually is enough to keep the swelling from going.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be wrapped like super tight.
No.
I think that's the biggest mistake people would make is just they feel like it's not tight enough, and it almost causes too much of a problem because it's too tight and it's causing more pain. So.
Yeah, or the other thing, I'm sure you've seen this, Will, is that people will come in with like an ace bandage that they wrap, and they don't actually wrap it correctly, so they're actually cutting off. So there's a very specific way where you want to wrap a limb, and that's where you're not completely occluding the blood vessels. And sometimes that can actually make it worse. So you want to be careful just taking an ace bandage and just wrapping it as tight as possible and thinking that that's compression. Okay, so you just want to be cautious with that. So if you are sitting for long periods of time at your job, 8 hours, you may want to do some compression to try to continue to control some of just the swelling, right? Not the edema.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like saying the tree shrub. I don't know. You're saying two things that are the same thing, and it makes me smile every time.
Yeah, can't get out of that habit.
We got to dig up that ground earth.
What's that?
We got to dig up the ground earth.
Yeah, that's not happening. So then, obviously, the other thing that you're going to be doing is trying to do some strengthening, right?
Yeah.
Mobile.
Get range of motion-y things. Yeah.
So like ankle pumps, right?
Ankle pumps, ankle circles. I like to do the ABCs with the ankle, with the foot. That's tricky because people tend to want to use their whole hip. I usually to make sure that they can use to make sure that they're going to use just the ankle. I'm not going to judge your handwriting. So if it's not exactly correct, it's not a correct X. Don't worry about it. Just do your best.
Yeah. So ABCs with the ankle, circles, ankle pumps. Usually, especially if mobility and pain is something that we're trying to manage early on, those might be the first things that you do before you even start to do any weight bearing.
Yeah.
And you might be doing those every hour just to keep it moving and just to introduce normal movement that doesn't produce pain. So, sometimes if you've got a really bad sprain, you may be doing that for a week and it's kind of boring and frustrating.
But it'll be worth it though because it will feel better afterwards. Mm-hmm. It feels like you're not doing as much, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. So then the other exercises that are going to be important from like a strengthening standpoint, and you can do this through what is considered an isometric contraction, or you could do it by using like a TheraBand, like a exercise resistant band. But basically, you're going to work all the angles of the joint, which is going to be turning the toes in, pulling the foot in, pulling the foot out, pulling the foot up, and pushing the foot down. And again, you can do this isometric. You want to explain isometric? You're better at explaining things.
Isometric would be forcing the muscles to work but not actually moving. So going up to a wall and trying to push the wall is an isometric exercise because none of your joints are moving, but yet your muscles are all working. So in this instance, like what I like to do with a TheraBand for isometric exercises on the foot is try to keep the foot in neutral and then just pull the TheraBand in a direction.
There you go. So that's considered an isometric.
Yep.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to do is, especially if you're just at a desk, is you can put your heel like on the side of the leg of the desk and actually just push the inside of your foot inward against that desk. It's not going to move the joint, and then you can switch that by putting the heel on the opposite side and pushing outward.
Yeah.
So that's another example of an isometric exercise. So if you don't want to be doing like exercises at work in an office setting, something of that nature, you can still get some of those exercises in, periodically throughout the day. So once pain levels have somewhat subsided, swelling has somewhat subsided, you've regained a decent amount of motion. The next step is to kind of introduce, more functional activities and maybe higher level activities where we're, introducing some balance, some joint stability with active motion, those types of things, right? So to talk a little bit about some of the things you like to do, Will.
With joint mobility and heel-toe walking, like you're imagining you're walking on a tightrope and just walking like that. You did yesterday. You did the karaoke.
Oh yeah.
Karaoke walk, which is I cannot describe it. Is basically weaving your legs. I'll have to put it.
It's also sometimes people know it as a grapevine, right?
Yes.
Have you heard people describe it?
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
We always just did it in football, and we just did it. I don't know. We never had a name for it, but I can link to that. Simple things of that nature, little squats to kind of introduce that sort of movement and stretching and strengthening there.
Mm-hmm. Single leg stance.
Yep.
Yeah. Maybe a little mini lunge with the leg out in front.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Those are all going to be things that start to incorporate functional activity, functional movements, but also proprioception, which is something that I do think we need to talk about just a bit. One of the things that happens with ankle injuries a lot of times is you lose what is considered proprioception. Proprioception is one of the three balance systems that the brain uses to kind of keep ourselves upright and not falling over. And so proprioception, they're small little receptors that sit within the joint, and they basically tell our brain where the joint is in space. So if you're pulling your hand up and you've got your eyes closed, okay, you know that joint is being pulled up, even though you are not physically seeing it. From a balance standpoint, this tells us very quickly whether or not the ankle starts to roll, and it gives us the brain an opportunity to have what I would consider kind of righting reactions, like quick muscle contractions that kind of correct that joint mobility before you have any type of other injury. So a lot of times, what happens when swelling happens?
I'm proud. I'm proud of you. You're getting.
I almost did it. When swelling occurs or an injury occurs, that proprioception actually starts to turn off, and the brain doesn't perceive it as much. So what will happen is if you start to roll the ankle again, the ankle will move much further before your brain realizes that the ankle has moved, and by that point you may have actually gone past the point of no return where you start to injure that ankle again. So we want to try to do this in a very controlled environment through like single leg stance, some of these functional activities like karaoke, walking the line like Will talked about, maybe like a wobble board of some kind. Those types of things to try to train the brain to recognize that proprioception again, so that next time that it happens in kind of a natural environment and your foot or your leg starts to roll out, your brain will catch it more quickly, and then you can protect your joint. So proprioception is really important in terms of functionality and specifically in joint protection, so that you don't have another re-injury. And I think that's probably when people, if people are rehabbing this stuff on their own, I would say that that's probably the biggest thing that they miss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people understand, okay, well, I can't push through pain, it hurts, so I'm gonna ice it, I'm gonna elevate it, and people understand, okay, I'm gonna gently move it a little bit before,
and I need to get stronger.
Yeah, and I gotta get stronger, absolutely. But what they lack typically is that last little bit where they're actually going to retrain the body for that proprioception, and that takes some time, but it's certainly something that I think and you'll redevelop it over a period of time, even if you don't specifically train for it. But if you can train for it, you can get back to kind of that highest level as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I always feel like proprioception, that kind of stuff, comes pretty quickly. As long as there's no other extreme circumstances, I feel like once your pain and your strength is basically kind of normalized, that comes pretty quickly. If you're training it, if you're not,
okay. Yeah, as long as you're training, that's what you're saying. Yeah. But if you don't train it, a lot of times it's just slower to react. Not that you're going to have another injury, but it just increases the risk.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's about all I've got on ankles. Anything else you want to talk about?
Not ankles. The only thing I would say about ankles is I feel, I don't know if people are worried about it. Like I feel like the big thing is like with strength. I feel like that they're worried about not being as strong as they think they need to be, and I always feel like the ankle doesn't need to be as strong as they think. It just needs to have more endurance and quick riding abilities, more of an isometric strength, because it needs to hold you in a neutral as opposed to being able to push out a lot of weight.
Yeah, I think if you return to if you're a high level athlete, obviously there's different circumstances for this. So if you're a high level athlete, I think you need a lot of good strength. But in terms of your normal functional activity, Even if you're just, somebody who likes to run for the most part, and you're running not on trails, you don't need a ton of strength to return to normal function. So I agree with you with that. I think one of the biggest things, like I said earlier, is that proprioception, just making sure that you're getting a little bit of training for that and just not completely ignoring it.
Yep, I agree with that. So that would be about wrapping it up with ankles, but I had a patient ask me a question yesterday.
Yes.
They said that their chiropractor said that they're out of line. What do you think that means?
What do I think that means?
Yeah.
You're opening up Pandora's box here, aren't you?
No, I'm opening Pandora's box. I don't know whose box that you're opening, but they don't. I can guarantee you they do not have the problems that Pandora's box does.
What do I think about chiropractic alignment?
Well, here,
things going out of line?
let me ask you this. Do you think that a chiropractor ever tells you that you're in line prior to them touching you?
Oh boy. Let me take a very neutral political stance on this. Here's what I'm going to say: is I think there are really good chiropractors. I think there are really good physical therapists. I think there are really good doctors, and I also think there are really bad chiropractors, therapists, and doctors.
There's good and bad in everything.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about the chiropractic business model is that they really predicate it on, or they did in the past. There is a shift that's occurring, so I will credit them to that. But they in the past they have been saying, come see us 1 to 2 times a week, 3 times a week for the next 6 weeks while we correct your alignment. One of the first things that's important to understand is that the current research does not indicate that your bones actually go out of alignment. Okay, there's no research over the last 5, 7, 10 years that actually indicate that happens. So things aren't slipping out of alignment. You're not fragile. What ends up happening typically is there can be an injury around that area, an inflammatory response, and essentially what happens is that there's an increased tonal change around that structure, which doesn't allow that joint to move properly. When you see a chiropractor make an adjustment, or what would be considered an adjustment, really physical therapists do very similar things. We call them more manipulations than adjustments. And what it is it's a very quick stretch to the muscle or to the joints or with the injured area that they're focusing on. And what ends up happening is that is an actual neural input to the brain, which causes the tone of that muscle to turn off or to shut down, which then allows the joint to move more smoothly, more correctly from a biomechanical standpoint. So you get an adjustment, you get a manipulation, and all of a sudden you feel like, hey, I'm moving much better, and it's because of the tonal change. It's not because bones and things were actually put out of alignment. If your bones, whether it's a shoulder, whether it's a lumbar spine vertebrae, if those are actually going out of alignment, you would be going to the ER.
Yeah.
And so it's more of a tonal change that's being created. There's a lot of chiropractors in our area that are shifting gears because of the research and making that change and that kind of education change for patients, which I think is really good. But there are also some that are not. And the one thing that I do say to a lot of patients is, in terms of like one of the goals for physical therapy, when we do any type of manipulation, mobilization, which are all again trying to change the tone of the structure that we're trying to relieve pain from, is you need to introduce some type of normal movement pattern afterwards. There's a window of what we would consider like a neural window where those muscles are going to be calmed down and the joint is going to be able to move more correctly. And that's the time when you start to introduce more, whether it's an isometric muscle contraction or a gentle strengthening or a gentle stretching or an active range of motion exercise that's going to help to facilitate normal motion while the tone is turned off. You have to take advantage of those little windows of opportunity when you're feeling well. So, one of the things that I tell people a lot is, I have no problem with chiropractors at all. I have no problems with other therapists. I don't try to get into the rationale of why chiropractors, doctors, other therapists are doing their thing. I have my own clinical reasoning that I go by, but what I would tell them is that if you are going to see like a chiropractor, and they're just cracking you or manipulating or adjusting you and then sending you out the door, I don't know if that's the greatest service that's being provided to you at this time. So there are a lot of benefits to being able to be cracked, manipulated, but then you have to take the advantage of the moments when you are feeling better. So if you're just going to go and get cracked, manipulated, and then go and sit in the car for 20 minutes, drive home, and then sit on the couch and make dinner or eat dinner or whatever it is, that's not a good plan. So you need to rethink that strategy, in my opinion. Okay, there may be other people that have other opinions out there, but from what I can tell from a lot of the local chiropractors around here, and ones that I've had conversations with, there is a growing trend that business model is changing a little bit, and they are actually, you see a lot even across the country where chiropractors are doing their mobilizations and manipulations because they're better at it than we are.
Oh yeah, by far.
They're flat out better at it than we are. We have a chiropractor in one of our clinics that is actually PT, and he's more PT oriented now than he was chiropractic care. But the amount of training that he had in PT school for mobilizations and adjustments versus in the chiropractic courses and coursework, it doesn't even hold a candle. I mean, they spend all kinds of time on that, and they're much more skilled at it than PTs, even though we do some of it. So there's certainly a skill and some value there, but you just need to make sure that you're utilizing and making the best of that opportunity when you are being corrected, okay? Or when the mobilization is not being corrected. That's a bad phrase there. When the mobilization is being performed. I don't know. That's my soapbox. There you go. There's Pandora's or Pandora. What did I call it before?
I don't know. You said it completely wrong.
Pandora.
It's Pandora.
Isn't that a streaming service?
Yes.
Music? Pandora?
Yes.
Pandora.
No, Pandora.
Yeah. Whatever. I'm done.
On that note.
Well, do you have any comments on that? What do you
No,
think?
I think you're right. It's like anything. It's the biggest problem I have with chiropractors is them saying they can cure the common cold. When they make all these bold claims of, your baby has colic. You bring your baby in and it won't have colic anymore, and things of that nature.
Yeah, or the holistic approach.
Yeah, it's
a little scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a lot. I mean, I don't know a lot about it to make a lot of comments.
I don't either.
On that part, it would worry me if that was your.
I don't even know if they're making those claims. It's just that I've heard people, patients.
Well, I know there are some out there. I don't think there are a lot. Though.
No, there's not. And it's like anything. Like you said, there's good and bad with everything. It's just you walk into a restaurant, and if you have a bad experience, you're going to tell 10 people. If you have a good experience, you're probably going to tell 1 or 2. So it's the bad ones that get talked about a lot more, just because we all like to rail against things.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. If you don't have anything else.
No, I got nothing.
All right.
This podcast was for educational purposes only, if I could read. It is not designed to diagnose or treat. When beginning any exercise program, it should be reviewed and discussed with your medical professional prior to beginning. Information on this podcast is not designed to replace medical treatment. Remember, treat yourself.